Hey everyone, welcome to the 13th episode of Project Uproar. Today our topic is fasting.
Yeah, and we're excited to talk about this. Obviously, fasting has more than one connotation to it. When one thinks of fasting, they think firstly of going without food for a period of time or going without a certain food for a period of time. But it also has other connotations as well. You could think about going without a certain TV show, disciplining yourself to not not perform a certain action. So fasting basically for myself means that idea of putting yourself through a practice that teaches you discipline and teaches you to go without something that usually has a strong hold over you, obviously. So if you're
Like food.
like food, obviously, right? You need food. But
Yeah.
if you don't watch Netflix, saying I'm going to be giving up Netflix, there's obviously it's going to do nothing for you. But if you are someone who, just going back to food, if you're someone who craves chocolate granola bars 3 times a day, saying you're going to go without for a period of a week, I would consider that to be fasting. So it's something that holds a great meaning for you or has a great hold or influence over you. Making the decision to go without for a period of time, whatever that period of time is, it could be a short period of time, long period of time, is what I consider fasting.
So something that tests your discipline
Exactly.
and builds your discipline at the same time and gets you kind of unaddicted or unhooked to certain things.
Exactly. Yeah. And I like that idea of unhooked. Like, I know, looking up a little bit about different forms of fasting, a big one now is digital fasting in terms of your phone, right?
Okay. And that's what it's called.
Well, yeah, digital fasting, digital minimalism. I believe someone named Cal Newport writes about this, digital minimalism, where I think he full out advocates for unplugging completely, but I think he gives alternatives where, like, for example, when you wake up during the day, a form of fasting can be you don't look at your phone for the first hour, right? So often we go to our phone, and a lot of us, including myself, I'm guilty of this, lay in our beds, watch videos or check our emails or catch up on a text that you miss. Instead, making that decision to, rather than do that, go outside, for example, or go to your couch and meditate, or go and eat breakfast, whatever it is, right? That's considered a small digital fast. So fasting, I believe, can be something that is only for a short amount of time, or it can be something that's prolonged. Like, I know when it comes to religion, there are a lot of practices in various religions, including Christianity, and specifically Catholicism, where people go without something for a certain amount of time. I know a few months ago, for Catholics, there was the season of Lent, which Lent is all about, right? 40 days of trying to go without something, right? They say it could also be doing something that you don't normally do, which, I wouldn't consider fasting, but it definitely emphasizes that idea of fasting. I remember when I was a kid and growing up, I gave up my Gameboy when Game Boys were huge, which was
That's
super
man. Yeah.
Game Boy Color, which was super difficult to do. And actually, I think I did it for 2 years, and the 1 year
Whoa.
I cheated at the end. It was like the 30 something day, and I remember it was hidden, and I decided, I don't know why. It's my first time. Second time, I think I went through the whole thing. But yeah, that was difficult to do, especially at a time when I remember it was Pokemon was the game to play, and it was all about, right, going far and catching Pokemon and acquiring badges, and my friends played, and to go without for that period of time was tough. But I think it did teach me a lot about not just discipline, but it also forced me to pursue other things maybe I wouldn't have put time into.
Exactly.
So for sure, I think there are a lot of benefits when it comes to fasting, because it does teach you to go without, but it also allows you to explore new things, because that time you would have used it, you could use it for other means.
Definitely. And I'm impressed. I don't usually associate you with being a gamer, So it's cool
Game
to
Boy,
know.
what
It's
when
cool to know that you were at one point.
well, I would not consider myself a gamer. I never had any up besides the Game Boy Color. I never had any up to date system. All I had was a Super Nintendo at my house. So you got to think like when people were playing like PlayStation 3 or whatever, like all I had was a Super Nintendo, and at that point it was hidden under my bed.
Nice.
So I besides the Game Boy Color, I had no other system. So that was the only time I was like up to date with my gaming.
What brought you to doing it? To trying to give up gaming at such a young age?
It was specifically for the religious practice of
Okay.
Lent.
Okay.
Like I knew, like, and usually, like school emphasized giving something up, so it was probably put it in my head from school. Like, think of something hard that you want to give up, whether it be candy. A lot of kids said like candy, or what whatever.
Imagine no candy for a year.
Well, for 40 days.
Okay,
it was,
yeah.
It was for the practice of 40 days.
And for your Game Boy, it was 40 days
it was
too?
40 days.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. And that's interesting that you bring that up because that's exactly what kind of got us to try fasting. Like recently, we did a 40-day fast in a specific way where once a week, usually Friday, we didn't eat anything. We just drank water or sometimes even coffee, but we didn't eat anything. And that kind of inspired us to be more interested, or at least me, to be more interested in fasting, like in recent history, because before that, I always assumed you can't go without eating, but like it turns out that a lot of people talk about the benefits of fasting, and there's some people online on YouTube, for example, who go like 7 days without eating. Now that's like more extreme. I think you should like ask your doctor if that would be all right if you want to go that long. But for one day was definitely manageable in my opinion. And it was great because that's like one of your most primal urges to eat, right? And all of a sudden you're used to eating, snacking throughout the day, and yet you can't eat anything all day. And yeah, it was a really eye-opening experience. Really feel like it trained my discipline. And we haven't been doing it after those 40 days, but I'm interested in the idea, and I definitely think that I was at my most disciplined when I was partaking in that weekly.
Yeah. Like I've done it here and there, but not committed. So, and again, like my goal wasn't to continue it throughout the year. It was whenever I feel relevant, do it. But then during that period of time, which was really tough because during that period of time when I did make the commitment, there were two instances where I was heavily tempted. One was for a staff lunch, and we all went out to a restaurant and ate, and everyone was eating except myself. I was drinking water.
Yeah.
And so that was super tough.
Yeah.
But everyone was respectful of my decision. And then there was another time someone asked me to go and eat for an occasion, and I was like, it was for a special occasion. I was like, oh, like it's right near the end, I could cheat. But then I decided not to. So yeah, there were moments of temptation. But in terms of physical health, yeah, there are, according to different studies, benefits. And actually, I spoke with my doctor about this because I kind of spoke with him after the fact I did it, but I was speaking to him like, if I wanted to continue this, is this a good thing? And he actually like recommended fasting, and he alluded to like our like ancestors back then used to fast all the time, and how yes, it's very normal for the human body. Mind you, you have to be healthy, right? So if you have health problems like diabetes or other things, you definitely have to check with your doctor. But he said on average, if you're just the average healthy person, it's not even something you really have to check with your doctor. If you want to fast 1 day a week, he says like there's so many great benefits, such as obviously weight loss. It could help with insulin levels, boost your immune system, increase your growth hormone, like just overall extend longevity. Like there's so many different things it does for your body. And for myself, it very much helped me kickstart weight loss. Mm-hmm. So originally I was a certain weight, and all my weight was basically around like the stomach area, like I was skinny everywhere else. And so I knew that it had to do with what I was eating for sure. Exercise was something, but I mean, like, I was exercising an okay amount, but I think the eating was the biggest part. I was overindulging. And so what I decided to do was this, give up, first of all, my diets became a little bit more minimalistic. So my lunches, I went about eating a little bit less, like a salad or a soup consistently every day. And then my breakfast, I ate lighter, like I ate like a yogurt or maybe a banana, that was it. Before I would sometimes indulge with like breakfast sandwiches and stuff. So I did minimalize my breakfast and lunch. My dinners, I basically kept the same. But my biggest thing, I think, like the meals, they do help. But quite honestly, the thing that was getting me was the snacking between the meals.
Yes.
And that is difficult, especially when you're snacking after dinner, right? Going into the evening, you go and buy a bag of chips and eat it at like 9 o'clock at night when you're watching your favorite show. Like, that's not going to help if you want to lose weight. It wasn't helping me. So by doing this exercise fasting for 40 days, what it did, firstly, I didn't obviously have the same calorie intake every Friday, right? Which my weekly calorie intake was down. But then also what it taught me to do was, at first it was difficult. I found fasting, like, there were the first day or two I did it, like by 7 o'clock, I didn't have much energy, and I did feel not lightheaded, but I just didn't feel like I really wanted to go out and do anything. Like, I was very content with just kind of relaxing at my house because I didn't have any energy. But after that, it became routine, just like anything else, right? You have to go through that initial process, that change, that shock to your body. And what it allowed me to do was, going that period of time without eating, it allowed me to withstand going between meals the other days and not snacking, right? Because you're kind of like intermittent fasting between meals at times. And so what I did was, because I'm like, oh, I went like this whole period of time without eating, going, 4 hours between meals, not snacking, is going to be simple. And it did help. So for sure, the fasting helped with the snacking, helped cut out the snacking. That's what I recommend. Just talking with people about, like, they have a snacking problem. I'm like, if you do that one day of fasting, your body's going to get used to it, and you're not going to have that craving anymore. It's going to go away. You're just going to be a lot of times okay with the 3 meals. And so that's what really helped me lose weight, was the fasting really kickstarted everything. And I saw, like, I'll be honest with you, like, instant results after just like a couple weeks. I saw results, and then by the end of the 40 days, I saw crazy results compared to where it was at the beginning. So it does have a lot of physical benefits to it.
Yeah, and I'd say even not necessarily you don't have the urges anymore to snack, but it's almost like even if you do, it's much easier to overcome them because you're used to not giving in to those temptations for like a whole day. So what's between meals, right? So that situation transfers to that, like, muscle you're building by saying no, like, I'm not going to eat when you're hungry, also transfers over to other things like, no, I'm not going to do other unhealthy habits. Let's say maybe just instead of watching that extra Netflix show, you do something more productive. That's another thing with fasting. We're talking about cutting things out. Once you start cutting things out, you have more time to do that stuff that's really important to you. So you're automatically, that's a strategy I used to even finish big writing projects. I'm like, okay, you can't do anything else, so you can either just sit here, do nothing, or write. And I'm like, okay, writing's more interesting than doing nothing. So I went about actually finishing the project. So yeah, I think it's a great thing to start, like, taking stuff out, right? Very much relates to minimalism of your life that you want to, like, and then you'll automatically find yourself spending more time doing stuff you really value doing, which is amazing. And for me, I loved the idea of fasting, and I loved the fasting as well. I obviously didn't need to lose weight, right? I wasn't looking to lose weight, but I wanted to do it anyways because I really believe in building discipline and building that muscle. So for me, it was also like a great help in just that way. And in other days of the week, yeah, it was much easier to not eat snacks, to not give in to those temptations like ice cream and stuff like that. But I found that now that I'm not doing it weekly, I'm more loose all around, right? So like now that when I was doing it weekly, it was like that good restart, like a reboot where it's like, okay, that discipline's being rebuilt. But now that I haven't done that in a while, I almost feel like I'm more likely to snack than I was before, right?
Oh yeah, I actually completely feel that way as well. And yeah, I have been snacking more since I've stopped the fasting, or since I have been doing it as consistently. The last time I did it was a couple weeks ago. I actually fasted for 2 straight days, but that was because of a medical reason. I was getting a procedure done, so I had to fast for 2 days. But yeah, it's definitely helped with finding excuses to go and snack and do things that I wasn't doing before. So for sure, when you have that routine, you're doing it every week, it definitely helps with keeping consistent. So I completely understand where you're coming from. Really quickly, like the thing I think in terms of fasting that I liked about it, at least the routine we were doing, was it was for a certain period of time. So it was for like just that day. And I found like I wasn't going into it thinking, okay, I'm going to fast and cut out snacks. Like, because sometimes in terms of like losing weight, we think like we're going to go to the extreme. We're going to cut out all snacks. We're going to change our diets completely. And like, it's not reasonable. We're not going to stick to it, right? Like you can't just go from 0 to 100. So basically what I did was I started with the fasting, and that started helping with snack. I said I could still snack the other days, but that started helping with the snacks. I didn't feel the need to snack as much, or I felt more autonomy over being able to make the decision. And then that led to more of the minimalist breakfast and lunches. So it started with the fasting, and it kind of led to the other things. It was a domino effect, which I suggest, if you're interested in losing weight, doing just one step at a time. Like we talked about atomic habits, small little steps. Don't take this crazy leap, because it's probably you're going to give up on all of it instead of following through on something small, which fasting is not small. It is difficult, at least for myself it was. But at least you just have one thing you're working on instead of juggling multiple things. So that was definitely something that I found beneficial. As well, what I really liked, I don't know about yourself, but myself who, what goes into work outside of my house, every day it's such a pain I find to pack myself a lunch. And on those fasting days, it was so refreshing. Like, again, like nice. It simplified my life to be like, I'm just going to grab, basically what I would do every day is I'd grab like water and a bottle of Gatorade, and that would get me through the day. And like, it was just so refreshing to just grab the Gatorade and go. Like, it was like, it just made my life so much easier and more simple. So again, it goes back to that idea of minimalism. Like, obviously don't fast every day. It's not a good thing, but you need food. But just doing it for just a shorter period of time, it did feel kind of liberating.
I agree. I think that when we eat, when we kind of withhold from eating, it's a really good system where we're pretty much training everything. And one of the benefits is also that you have a situation where most of the time in modern society, I feel like we eat too much. And you have a situation where you're not giving your kind of system enough time to actually focus on fixing other stuff, because it's always focusing on breaking down food because we're constantly eating, right? And the idea of even intermittent fasting, which we didn't talk about specifically, like not even like a whole day, but let's say like just eating within a 16-hour window or an 8-hour window actually, and just eating all that within 8 hours gives your body ample time to digest and then to start focusing on different parts of the body that need healing and energy and attention. But if you're constantly eating throughout the day, then all of a sudden you have a situation where your body can't fix the other stuff because it's constantly focusing on breaking down food. And that's why you have people who, like on YouTube, like have back problems or inflammation or something like that, and they just deal with it, and it actually gives positive results by fasting, because the body all of a sudden has more time to actually fix other parts of the body because it's not so focused on breaking down food. And that's one of the most fascinating things to me, just like all of the benefits that I had no idea before we got into this like fasting trip or rabbit hole or whatever you want to call it. I didn't know how many benefits there actually were. And just I've heard it recommended by so many people. At the very least, I think everyone listening should try intermittent fasting. So let's say you just eat from noon to 8 p.m. and then just don't eat the rest of the time. And if you do that alone, I think you're also building discipline, and you're also going to see some of these benefits as well that come with fasting.
Yeah, it almost shows like you're the boss of your body, or you're not the slave to your stomach. Like you're in control. And just besides the physical benefits, I mean, I looked at this as, again, this kind of like spiritual discipline. When we were going through this fasting, like it meant more to me than just going without food. And I find that interesting. Like growing up, what I found, especially university, I was very like skeptical of like different religions' practice of fasting. Like I know like Jewish people, I believe, fast the afternoon before Yom Kippur, and like, you know, there's that idea of during Lent for Christians, you go every Friday without eating meat.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, and I'm sure when it comes
Christian
to
Orthodox.
Christian Orthodox,
yeah, so we give up like everything for probably also around 40 days. We give up everything that's meat except fish, and that comes from meat. So like eggs, like milk, dairy products.
So essentially you're going vegan.
Except fish, yes.
Except the fish, yeah. So, yeah, and so, you know, at the time I'm like, well, this is a dumb practice. I was thinking like in terms of a specific, like, especially like Christian context, like I knew I did, you know, research into the history of why fish, and I saw how early Christians, you know, had this financial tie to like people who would sell fish and fishermen. And, you know, I saw there were basically like financial reasons why they were choosing fish over it. So I saw like a little hole, like it wasn't coming from like necessarily a biblical teaching or anything like that. It was more made by humans. Excuse me. And so I thought like, well, this isn't an authentic practice at all, especially for those who are believing that specific faith. But then really, I started looking at it in another light, especially when I went through this fasting, I've been going through this fasting phase. And I'm like, no, like what it is, it's more than just saying like, I'm giving up meat or I'm giving up this. Like, it's not necessarily the act of, you know, doing it, but it's this test of discipline. And so I saw it as this, again, it's like this spiritual practice that teaches that discomfort, because obviously if you're so used to eating meat, you know, that's your comfort zone, or you're obviously, everyone eats, so everyone's used to food. But going without for a certain period of time, it teaches you that the discomfort you feel physically at first is not a bad thing, and it's actually a good thing, and it helps you grow. Maybe not your stomach, but it helps you grow in other ways. So for sure, I think that there are a lot of spiritual and personal development underlying meanings towards fasting. Strengthens your will, right? You're able
biggest thing in my opinion. That's the most important. Yeah.
Do you want to comment more on strengthening of the will?
Yeah, well, I also want to mention that we listened originally to an Art of Manliness podcast, and I think that might have been where we kind of got the idea. We heard someone talk about fasting as like a spiritual idea. And
his name is, by the way, Father Thomas Ryan. He's I believe like an older, which is interesting because he's older, like I don't know for sure, I'm not quoting, but it sounded like in the interview, like an older Catholic priest who was talking to Brett McKay from the Art of Manliness.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting that he took that idea of fasting very literally. But anyways, you could go on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the idea he kind of suggested was don't just fast. Take the money you would have spent on food and like give it to your church or give it to charity or something like that. So I kind of took that, I don't know if you did, but I took that idea to heart, and I'm like, okay, so every time I don't eat, I'll give like a symbolic $20 to my church, and then that way I'm actually kind of taking the money I would have spent on food and giving it somewhere. I'm not just kind of not eating and then spending that money on something for myself. And I found that that was also a very, very positive thing, because I always think if we give, we'll receive as well. I think the universe works like that. And it really helps you kind of even put yourself, even for a time, in the position of people who are less fortunate than yourselves in like a monetary way. And I think that's part of the practicing poverty idea that Seneca talks about too, that we're not only becoming more empathetic to what people are going through around the world that are suffering from poverty and hunger, but also we can benefit them and give them money to charities and stuff like that from the money we would have spent on food for ourselves. So I think in that way, it's a great way to not only build your willpower and discipline, but also kind of help people who are less fortunate while being empathetic to them as well. I think that's amazing. And yeah, the willpower wise, anything that's hard to do, anything you don't want to do, you're building that willpower muscle. Like, in the War of Art, Stephen Pressfield talks about the idea of resistance, and every time we overcome resistance to sit down and write or do our projects or do our art, we're using that muscle. Every time you take a cold shower, you're using that muscle. Every time you wake up early to run, you're using that muscle. So again, this fasting is just another way that you can really build that willpower, and you'll end up being much more productive and feel happier at the end of the day than if you start by going on your phone, eating whenever you feel like eating. You start to almost break down when you just kind of give in to all of your urges and you don't have the discipline to actually do what you're supposed to be doing and what's healthy for you.
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of that spiritual practice of fasting, a book that spoke about it for me, besides, I haven't gotten to Thomas Ryan's book, but another one that I read during this time when I was fasting was a book called Hiking with Nietzsche. And again, we're talking about the will, like that's very a Nietzschean term, the will. And Nietzsche is someone who practices, according to the book Hiking with Nietzsche, which is all about, I recommend it, I liked it. It's by a philosophy professor named John Haig, I think his name is. And he talks about going on this hike up to the mountains where Nietzsche was, and not only hiking, but fasting, and just going to this, what he calls not aesthetics, like the study of beauty, but ascetic, I think that's how to pronounce it, this ascetic ideal, which asceticism is all about, again, going through putting yourself through things that make you very uncomfortable. Yes. And trying to get past them. So he talked about not only putting himself through physical discomfort by hiking far more than he probably should have, but also going without eating while he was hiking, and really what it taught him. And he actually said he actually started developing like an eating disorder. So he said when you're fasting, it's really important that you understand it should be for a period of time. It's not all the time, because like you said, fasting almost becomes, when you get into the routine, addicting. And I could totally see that happening.
Me too.
I could picture you being after a period of time, your body's used to it, your mind's used to it. You could go without, and you almost, I feel like myself, the day after you fast, or the period when you're able to eat again, you're almost, right before you do it, you're almost on a high because you feel like you've accomplished something. Yeah. So extending that can be unhealthy if you're not careful. So he talks about that, but for sure, I definitely think when it comes to the will and when it comes to discipline, right, a lot of people have spoken about how fasting can train you for other pursuits in life, right? Especially that idea of holding off or delayed gratification, yes. Which is so important for anything, right? You talk about YouTube, you talk about jobs, right? You're not going to get that dream job right out of school. You're not going to, if you're pursuing a business, you're not going to get, unless you're super lucky, results right away. If you're a writer, you're not going to be publishing books. You're the first thing you're going to submit to a publisher. They're not going to be like, oh yeah, that's perfect. Like no changes, right? Everything is delayed in life. And fasting is just like a little lesson in delaying gratification and delaying results. And I think it trains you for other moments in your life when you're going to have to go through that.
100%. And when you have situations like writing, not only are you probably not going to get published right away, but even writing every day, how many days before you see any feedback whatsoever, right? And with business, with YouTube, obviously it's better than writing in the sense that you can get feedback quicker in that sense. But before you make it, before it becomes a viable business, you have to have patience. So I agree. I think that was a great point that you brought up with the building of patience. And in modern society, I feel like that's one of the biggest things we're lacking right now. It's almost like there's so much stimuli. Before when I was a kid, we had cable television, which could also be kind of distracting, but at least your favorite shows you were on like once a week or something. Now you can binge watch favorite shows all the time on Netflix. Literally, there's so much to do on your phone. Instagram stuff's changing every second. So to be able to practice something like delayed gratification, not reaching for those Cheetos or not grabbing something to eat right away when you're hungry, definitely that is important, because I think that patience and the ability to be patient is one of the major things moving forward that's going to contribute to people's success. Because people that need the results right away, need to see it, are going to give up way before they succeed.
Yeah, and definitely I totally agree with the technological age we live in. Like now, again, we could watch anything, we could put up any music video, we could listen to any song we want, really anywhere with the help of Spotify. And back then, like again, when I was a kid, I'm a millennial, if my favorite show was on, and I admit in the summertime I was a big TV watcher at times. If ever I went to my grandma's, I was a big, huge TV watcher. So, there were times like I'd be watching for hours and hours on end. But if my favorite show was on because basically I'll admit at the time, like there wasn't much to do at her house in terms of that entertained me. I mean, looking back, I'm like, oh, I could have done so much, but
could have talked to her.
Yeah, could have talked with her, could have read, could have explored backyard, but whatever. You don't know at the time. But, I definitely was tested with TV, because at the time, if my favorite show was on at 2:30 in the afternoon, well, I couldn't just watch it right away, right? I had to wait for it, and I had to watch other things which were less interesting. Just like, and now Much Music, which is, I believe, no longer even a channel anymore, right? Its main thing was it would give countdowns, and you'd have to wait for your favorite song. Like basically like the radio, right? The radio is like dying right now, music radio, because it's all about having to wait for your favorite songs. And like people call in to hear that. Like no one calls in anymore, right? You could just listen to the song whenever you want. Most people, I'm sure, when they're in their car nowadays, if you have Bluetooth, you're listening to what you want to listen to, whether it be an audio book or music. You're not listening to the radio unless it's maybe talk radio. You're not listening to the radio and hearing random songs you may not like, right? You are getting what you want when you want it. But again, that comes with consequences, because now we're less patient, right? We want, and again, those things spill over to other things in life, such as eating, right? If we're able to get whatever we want for music and for entertainment, we're going to think the same thing about food. And that's why the fast food industry is like booming now, because it's instant gratification whenever we want it. There's like McDonald's and Tim Hortons everywhere we look, right? And so we don't need to go home and spend the time to cook things homemade. It's just right there. And sometimes, like, it's funny, like sometimes if I'm out, I'm in a rush, like, again, I'm a victim to, I'm a fall for it as well, right? Sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't want to go to this place to grab something to eat because I'm going to have to wait a little bit longer. They're going to have to make it and ask me questions like, do you want this? Instead of just like, here, I'll grab, number one. And it's just like, yeah, it's already made for you. Here you go. Right.
Nice.
It's just like it definitely affects like this idea of like everything's accessible now all the time. Like you could buy anything off of Amazon. You could buy groceries now, right? You don't even have to go to the grocery store anymore, where you could just buy. I remember I was mad when Walmart started selling groceries. I'm like, this, now you should have to go to the grocery store and go through the aisles and wait. And I'm like, oh, Walmart, you don't have to go to the grocery store. You can just go to Walmart for everything. Now you could just go online and sit on your couch and basically get anything you need and have it delivered to you. And we're victim, like we do it as well, right? Like,
yeah, I do it more than you, I think.
Yes.
We take it for granted. I think that's the biggest thing, because like when we used to wait for those shows to come on, right? Like when they came on, we were so ecstatic. Like let's say Saturday morning or something, I'm watching like Dragon Ball Z or something like that. I was ecstatic. Or I had a VHS tape on it. And I'm like, oh my God.
The VHS was the best, because the VHS, you always had to rewind and fast forward, and it takes so much time to get to the spot you needed to get to.
Yeah.
Like I remember when I like had I ended up getting a serious eye injury from baseball. So all I could really do for my recovery was really like watch TV. I wasn't allowed to read or do anything. So what I would do is I just had tons of VHSs, and so I'd put them in, but I'd always be spending so much time having to rewind and fast forward to the part I stopped. So yeah, like there was so much benefit to that.
Yeah, and now, right, we can watch all our shows and we take it for granted, and we can like eat whenever we want and we take it for granted. But when you fast, you come back to the fact that you start to appreciate food, the value of food, the fact that no one has, like a lot of people don't have food every day like we do. So in that sense, slowing down, fasting teaches you to actually see the things around you, appreciate them, and not just take it for granted, be in autopilot mode, and live kind of like a zombie reacting to your stimulus, whatever you want to do. It teaches you to, again, take control of your life and make conscious decisions.
For sure, yeah. And yeah, I do like that idea of, though, again, like fasting isn't like, it doesn't help you understand what it's like to not have food, right? Because obviously, like, people who don't have food could go for days and they can have other problems wrong with them. But I liked on the Art of Manliness, they talked about how like fasting is like, it is this act of like solidarity. Like it's this like, yes, like we're for a moment, like we're trying to experience, because I think for myself, I very much did it for that reason as well. There are many reasons why I fasted, but one of them was like I wanted to experience just for a brief glimpse, though it's not necessarily accurate, but a brief glimpse of what it's like to not have something. And again, like that applies to anything, like cell phones, right? Like deciding to not answer messages or restrain from it for a period of time, right? It teaches you that there's so much more to life than just responding with quick instant messages, right? It teaches you to reconnect with yourself, to reconnect with other people in more meaningful ways. So for sure, like there are lessons that you could take away, and you could kind of, I don't want to say like experience things how they were back then, but like you could definitely, it allows you to, because so often we say like this is the age of progress and we think we're always moving forward, but at the same time, I know Marshall McLuhan, right, the big media guy who wrote so many books about media studies. He was basically like one of the founders of media studies. He talked about with every new form of technology, an old way of life is unwritten, like it's gone away. And so it allows you to like reflect back on those old ways of life and just kind of like live through them even for a short period of time. Because I think obviously just because something new comes up doesn't mean other things didn't have any value.
Yeah.
We talk about that with literature as well, right? Just because new forms of, new books come out doesn't mean something that was written in the 1700s has no value anymore because it was historically or scientifically inaccurate.
Yeah, that's the beauty of books, really. We were talking about that literature in particular, fiction, that because it talks about the human condition, I can read like books written long time ago, hundreds of years ago, and completely relate to the emotions, the feelings of the characters, and how it captures the human condition. Whereas with science, right, you're constantly being updated, and if you're taking someone who talked about science 300 years ago and taking his theories, all of them like to heart, obviously it doesn't work because it's been outdated. But yeah, when it comes to the human condition, literature is definitely always going to be valuable no matter how old it gets. And it teaches us, if we, let's say, give up Netflix or something like that, which I actually love Netflix. I love that I can order my coffee from Amazon. I love all that stuff, and I do that. But definitely, I think that when you give that up intentionally for a period of time, you can appreciate it much more. And that's the idea. And you can see that the world doesn't end if you don't have all these things you think you need. Seneca talks about practicing poverty, and that the benefits of that are you realize that a human being doesn't need that much to live a happy life, to survive and live a happy life. And if you give up Netflix, let's say, if you give up even technology, like for a certain period of time, you'll realize you don't need it, and all of a sudden you take back some of that power that you fear, like, oh my God, what if I can't afford to have TV or to have Netflix or to have this or that? You realize you don't need it, and you start to feel more at ease, because if you lost it, now you know you can survive without it. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the big benefits as well for fasting. And I also I like the idea of like anything you might be addicted to or like too used to, give it like a period of time where you don't consume it. So for example, one of the things that I used to love having was coffee. And now I drink a decaf because of the caffeine in coffee. And it's supposed to have like a lot of the same benefits just without the caffeine, which is like, sounds like a win-win. And I like the taste of coffee and all that. But I was like addicted to caffeine. I had to have it every day, or like my head would hurt, like I would get headaches. And so I decided, okay, I've done all this other stuff like fasting, like I've had, we've been running. I just ran like a half marathon distance the other day. Like I'm always pushing myself, but coffee has been the one thing that I was always like addicted to, always kind of needed. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to make a conscious decision to cut out like caffeine. And I ended up, the first 2 days, I had like, first day I had a headache, then the second day a more vague headache, and then it passed. And now I'm just drinking decaf. I might move back to coffee, but I think it was important to have that like weeks or even a month, I'm not sure how long it was, of just not having caffeine. And that's what I recommend to everyone. If you're really addicted to something, try not having it for a bit, and then you can come back to it, but at least now you know that you can survive without it.
Yeah, and I really like what you were saying. You were kind of alluding to minimalism.
Always.
And how, and how basically, what fasting is about. It's about emphasizing like absence from something over abundance. And again, like there are a lot of ideas of like, obviously minimalism is trying to cut things out more on a permanent level, but I think fasting and minimalism very much go hand in hand, because especially if you're talking about physically, like the food you put into your body, you really start reflecting, just like you do when it comes to minimalizing the spaces in your wherever you live. You really start reflecting about what you put in your body, and if you always have to be full all the time. And I think that's important, because we may think, we have to be full all the time and we can never go a moment without feeling kind of like empty. But again, like it's very natural physically for humans to feel that. And I think with our culture, we feel that we always have to have an abundance of food. And this relates to so many things, like including, if we go like at the most philosophical level, like meaning in our life. Like sometimes when we're reflecting about like what's meaningful, what's our purpose, we get to those like, we get to avoid, right? It's kind of like there's an absence, like, oh geez, like I really have to reflect what's important to me. Whereas, and that's really scary to go through that. And sometimes what we do is we just try to like distract ourselves from that by pursuing different things and like covering that up, right? An abundance of things, busying ourselves all the time instead of being like, okay, like, can we just simplify things for a bit? So again, like all of these stuff and all of these things, including like thinking about meaning in life, right? I know someone like Jordan Peterson talks a lot about that. And, you know, in terms of minimalism, all of these things interconnect with each other. And I think really what fasting does, like, especially if you're someone who's maybe in like a rut right now, and there's a great article on the Art of Manliness website called Spiritual Disciplines like Fasting. And there's a lot of great points. And one of them that really sticks out to me is if you're in like some sort of rut, like a psychological rut, whatever that rut may be, physical rut, what fasting does is it kind of reasserts your humanity, right? It allows you to be like, yes, like we are similar to animals, but there is one key thing that separates us. It's like we're able to say no to certain things. We're able to, you know, train ourselves and withstand things. Whereas animals, you know, obviously that's where that idea of like primitive or animalistic tendencies come from. Whenever something is, you know, being kind of waved in front of us, they just go for it. They don't stop and reflect. You know, when you go without, when you put yourself through something like fasting at whatever level you're doing it, whether it be food or giving something else up, it could almost, I would argue, like get you out of a rut. It's like, well, like I am a powerful being. Like exactly. I am able to make choices in my life, right? I have so much autonomy. I could do so many things, right? You could learn that just from a simple act of fasting.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the time we feel like in a rut because we feel like stuff is out of our control. Mm-hmm. And this all of a sudden gives you agency again. It shows you are in control of your life. And yeah, of course, that would have an effect. So, yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah, and that's, again, going back to someone like Jordan Peterson, one point which is interesting, right? It's like it can be contested at times, but he has that one rule, which is like clean your room. And again, like I think what he's trying to emphasize there is that, you know, there are times in our life where we feel we have no agency, but there are certain things we do have agency over, right? We could say like we accomplished something by quite simply making our bed. It sounds very like minute and it doesn't sound very meaningful or impactful, but at least you say I have autonomy, and then it starts to become a domino effect, right? It's just like I'm able to do this, so maybe I could just think a little bit bigger, and then you start feeling confident again that you can, you know, you could have a say, and there are pathways for you.
Yeah,
everything isn't just closed off.
It's kind of like the idea of that keystone habit. Once you start building like a positive habit, all of a sudden it encourages you to do more and more and more. And yeah, with fasting, you're going to be much more conscious, not even just about food, but about everything you're doing. And you're going to be like, do I need to watch this much like Netflix? Do I need to eat these bags of chips, or should I go out for a run? You know, everything starts to build up in a positive way. And we're always either moving up or down, I feel like, you know, there's no standing still. And if you're constantly, like, let's say, feeding the part of you that wants to eat chips, that wants to, like, I'm not saying not have cheat days, but let's say constantly eating chips, not exercising, not doing what you want to do or what you know you need to do, but procrastinating, then all of a sudden you're gonna find yourself quickly in a negative spiral. But once you just even do one positive thing, it's gonna start bringing you up, and everything is gonna seem easier. Even waking up early and going for a run, even fasting, even working on those projects you've been worried to start.
Absolutely. And I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to do right now a plug for our next book talk. And it's going to be weird because I haven't even spoken to Igor about what the next book is, but I've just decided on the spot to just take action and just decide it. So I apologize. Interesting. It's a book we've talked about, though, but I think it very much relates to fasting. Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle is the Way.
Okay, we have discussed that.
Yeah. So it was a possibility.
What made you pull the plug? Let's hear it.
This conversation just reminded me of that book, and I just thought it would be a great transition from this podcast. But the book We've mentioned Ryan Holiday. He's this young businessman who has his hands in a number of things, but he is a writer, and he's written many books, perennial sellers. Ego is the Enemy. He's actually has a new book coming out in October about silence.
Interesting.
Let me just look it up if I can. Anyways, I'll try to find it. But the book that has the most, that has stuck with me the most, is his book, The Obstacle is the Way, which is a book filled with stories from various individuals throughout history and how they pursued things which were uncomfortable for them, or they went through things that were uncomfortable, right? In our case, we're talking about fasting, but obviously it's not just fasting. And basically how these uncomfortable moments, these uncomfortable events, here's the title, by the way, Stillness is the Key. Okay, so anyways, going back to Obstacle is the Way, talks about not just how, obstacles and hardships and putting yourself through these sort of aesthetic experiences, how it's not only, important to do so, but it's necessary for growth. Like, we need this to grow as people, to become better, right? And so I just think Ryan's book is such a great tie-in with fasting, because really when you are fasting, you're creating your own obstacle, right? It's not like an obstacle imposed upon you. You're putting yourself through an obstacle, and you're doing it in order to create an opportunity to learn about yourself, to learn from the situation. So that's why the book, I love it so much. And, another reason why I love it is, again, like the way Ryan Holiday writes, he writes like someone like Robert Greene, who they're not trying to write this dense theoretical book. What they're doing is they have a simple principle at the beginning, simple in theory, not in practice, simple in theory, and then they illustrate it through various stories. So you're able to, see firsthand how various individuals, and a lot of these individuals were people like I look up to, how they went through various obstacles and became stronger people. So hope it's okay, but I've declared the next month's book talk to be The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday.
Yeah, unilaterally. It's like I boycott it right now. No.
Yeah.
No, that's completely cool, and we've discussed that. And I like Ryan Holiday because he's a big proponent of Stoic philosophy, and he is a big fan of it. And obviously, that's why I even got exposed to him, because I was trying to consume everything involved with Stoic philosophy because it speaks so much to me. And yeah, it's exactly like Seneca said: when we put ourselves intentionally into the obstacle, when we put ourselves intentionally through difficult situations like fasting, we are preparing like warriors who used to not battle in the winter, but we are practicing in the winter so that when summer comes, we are ready and we are prepared, because you never know when tough times could hit. And now if you've intentionally practiced, put yourself in difficult situations, it's going to be much easier for you to handle that. You're going to be prepared, rather than someone who's never been in a difficult situation and all of a sudden, hey, some life puts you in a difficult situation and you crumble because you're not used to putting that pressure on yourself. So for me, it's in a lot of ways something that will make you stronger when you put yourself in the way of the obstacle, and it will prepare you for when life can get difficult, which it can often do.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the thing I love that, getting into Stoic philosophy, what I love about it is it's just, I don't look at it as like, so often we think philosophy is like high and lofty, right? It's wisdom handed down from these, very smart intellectuals. Like, Stoic philosophy to me is like reading like life advice. It's just like things that, you're not necessarily arguing over the principles. It's just like, yeah, we can apply this. And there's things like Ryan Holiday said, like, there are other principles that, it's not like a perfect philosophy, right? It's like there are problems with it as well. But at the same time, there are great things we could take away from it and literally apply today.
Yeah. And that's one of my biggest, why I'm a big fan of Stoic philosophy because it is always giving you advice that you can actually apply in real life and not some theoretical stuff that won't actually improve it. Mm-hmm. So big fan of that. I'm looking forward to this book talk, Ryan.
Yes.
Although I did enjoy the spectacle of what you just said, how kind of like declared it. That was interesting. Do you have anything else to say about fasting? For me, it's you should definitely give it a shot. If you don't want to do a full day, try giving it at least intermittent fasting within an 8-hour window and see how it affects you. Because for us, it's definitely had nothing but positive effects.
Yeah, and I also just want to emphasize, right, you could practice fasting, and fasting doesn't have to mean like food. Again, it could mean other things as well, giving up, because I think it's important to give stuff up in order to, well, it just opens up the opportunity to really reflect about your life. Why do I have this in my life? Is it that important? Obviously food is, but other means, is it that important? Is it benefiting me? It just does so much for self-development to go without and then reflect upon it. So again, like, you don't necessarily have to do it at the food angle, even though, I think it is a good experience. It teaches you a lot. If you're a healthy person, you could do it. But there's so many different ways to fast, and they all have benefits to them.
Definitely. All right. And I'll see you on the next podcast.